The only way to get good at writing is to write a lot for a very long time. Now, in the past year or so, I've tried to move away from being a wannabe writer who says, yeah, I'll write this, yeah, I'll write that, to someone who's actually sitting down and getting the writing done. And in that journey, I've managed to build myself a pretty good writing routine, one that lets me write 1,000 words per day most days, or at least close to it. And that leads me to the obvious question, like, am I bullshitting you? Did I just pull this number out of my arse? I knew I wanted to make this video eventually. So back in February of this year, I started tracking my daily words that I had written. And I did this so that I could have something to show for it at least. And I owe it to you to be honest and say that I don't have a perfect track record. My goal is to hit 1,000 words per day, but it doesn't always happen. And that's just not realistic. Some days I'm completely out the game and writing just 100 words feels like such a drag. And sometimes it's longer periods where I write less overall. Maybe it's days or weeks. Recently I had finals, the exams, and I was hanging on for dear life. So I couldn't really afford to spare the time to sit down and get those 1,000 words in. So I was writing barely anything. It happens, that's life. And I'm not gonna sit here and talk to you as the godfather of writing who can hit those 1,000 words every single day forever, because it's just not true. But in my defense, in a normal schedule, I can hit 1,000 words a day. And that's what matters in the long run. It's the consistency, the effort over a long period of time. So with all that out the way, I'd like to share some of the approaches that have helped me get those reps in and really build a writing habit that's not only realistic, but effective. Now, funnily enough, the writing log I just mentioned was actually really helpful for getting my numbers up. And it was completely accidental. I never intended it to do that. Before I started tracking how much I wrote, I would still write every day. I'd wake up, I'd kind of snap into reality and get rid of that grogginess. And then I'd take my laptop and, get started for some early momentum. And, I was really proud of myself for that. I thought, oh, wow, look at me getting it started all early. But as soon as I started tracking my daily word count, I was humbled completely. As I wrote down how many hundreds of words I'd written, I realized I was writing way less than I previously thought, probably half as much. And this new self-awareness helped me because I could actually see my progress on the screen. It wasn't just a feeling in my mind, but real numbers that I could track and try and improve upon. Now that's all well and good, but whenever I talk about this topic, it reminds me of something quite nasty in the world of writing. And it's something that I know many new writers beat themselves up for, and it's quite sad to see. We have to remind ourselves that numbers aren't everything. And great writers are not made purely through sheer volume, but also other things that are part of the writing habit. If you set yourself this ambitious daily word count, like maybe 1,000 words per day, and you fail to meet it, then that's not necessarily a sign of failure. For example, let's say there was a professional poet and they only wrote 100 words a day. Now, would you see that as low volume? Yeah, maybe. Would you see it as a sign of failure? Absolutely not. That's just crazy to think. Because they might write small pieces every day, but within those pieces, there must be so much reflection and so much editing and tweaking and clever wordplay. All the skill and expertise in that could be more than someone else's 3,000 word essay. And I can vouch for that myself. I write in a lot of different styles, and I know that some are way harder for me than others. For example, with YouTube scripts, I can write 2,000 words a day pretty easily, with not too much effort or time. And that's because I've had more practice with them, so I guess it comes more naturally. And I find the style of writing a bit more fluid. You can just really pour out what you have to say and it sounds better on the spot. But then if I'm gonna write an ebook or an article, I can sit there for 3 or 4 hours and only spit out a few hundred words. Now, would I look at that session and think, yeah, that's a failure, that's a terrible day for my writing? No, of course not. Because I know within that period, I was researching more, I was editing, I was struggling, and I was learning. And because of that practice, I know it's gonna help me get to where I wanna be anyway, no matter how much time it took. I still got the practice in the end, and that's all that matters, whether it was in 100 words, in 500 words, or 3,000. Now, of course, the more writing you do, the better. And all of these techniques will help you hopefully get your quantity up. But the point is not to see it as the sole measure of success, and not to almost feel bad for yourself if you don't reach that goal, because it's okay. This next tip is incredible for writing loads almost without realizing it. And it's especially good if you use public transport a lot. So the bus, train, whatever. It's to get comfortable writing on your phone. I live in London, so it's pretty common for me to be on a train or on a bus or waiting for the two. Now I could sit there and twiddle my thumbs, or maybe there's a deranged crackhead who's singing, and that's quite entertaining. but I'd rather use that time constructively. So what I like to do is take out my phone, go on the Notes app, which in my case is Google Keep, and just get some writing done. Now, it could be I have a good idea for a script or a newsletter or an article, and I just get started on that. Or I might feel tired, I might feel drained, and I can't be asked writing that much. So all I do in that case is maybe I plan ideas, or I plan future projects and think about the structure. Anything to help me in the future, essentially. Now, at the same time, you can easily get distracted when you write outside. And you might go home, have a look at your notes and think, like, what is this absolute garbage I've produced? But that's still fine because you have yourself a first draft now. That means you've done the hard part. You have something to work with. And after a little bit of editing, you have yourself a finished piece of work. So even if the writing isn't great, you've done yourself a favor. So if that idea sounds interesting to you, then maybe have a look at the Notes app on your phone. Just familiarize yourself with it, and the next time you're waiting for someone or traveling, see if you can produce something. I know it might feel weird at first, but trust me, you get used to it. It's almost just like typing a long text. The only problem could be is if you have motion sickness. That's a different story. This next tip will hijack a primitive part of your brain to help you write more with relative ease. But first, a question. Why do people love starting new hobbies? Why do we love self-help videos that show us this new, never before seen technique? Part of the reason is because people love new things. It's why consumerism exists. It's why we love to travel and see new sights. And unfortunately, it's part of the reason why people cheat in relationships. Novelty is thrilling, and we chase it in all areas of life, whether that's for good or bad. Now, I'm sure this has deep roots in our history as humans. Maybe to survive, to explore new lands, to spread our genes even more. I'm not too sure. But the point is we can take this fact and exploit it to help us write more. If you look at my writing log, it's uncommon to see only one style of writing per day. In the same day, I might write a mini essay or two. I might add to the ebook. I might write a video script or a newsletter, all of these different things. This variation keeps the writing fresh. It's fun to jump between different styles because each one is slightly different to the next. That's powerful on its own, but there's an extra quirk that makes it even stronger. It means I can actually choose what to write based on how I feel. Now, discipline is good, don't get me wrong. It's good to do something even when you don't feel like it. But if you take that too far and adopt this really hardline approach, this hustler grind set mentality, it may work in the short term, but over time, it's going to make you feel miserable. And that's the last thing we want. So maybe then the solution is to branch out a bit, to add different styles to your writing, so that there's a higher likelihood that you're going to want to write at least one of them. Some days I just can't be asked to work on the book, but instead I pick something a bit more casual and lighter, like a mini essay or a script. Now that way I'm still getting writing in and I'm still practicing the craft without conditioning myself to hate it. So if this struggle sounds familiar to you, then try and see maybe how you could add some spice to your writing through different styles. Maybe it's short stories or poems or journal entries or mini essays. It could be anything. Even if the writing is super different to what you normally work on, or it has absolutely no relevance to your main goals, it's still a chance to practice and to learn. And that can help your main pursuits. And perhaps most importantly, you're enjoying yourself and you're creating something that's sustainable in the long run. And actually that leads nicely on into the next point. You have to write what you love. You can feel when a piece of writing has energy behind it. Even if it's not the best from a technical perspective or they're long dead for thousands of years, you can see that spirit shining through the pages. And you can tell that they put love into this work. And I'm sure you felt it in your own writing. It's almost like a flow state where the words pour out like a tsunami and you just absolutely love what you're doing. That's what happens when the work is important to you, when it's rewarding your own motivations and your desires. And what better motivation is there than pure love for the craft? It's a nice thought, but the opposite situation is scary, and I do my absolute best to steer clear from it. If what you write about is dictated by some other force, then you've given up your independence, and that's risky. In the worst case, you end up hating the work. It's part of the reason why writing in school can be boring. Now, I had to do lots of history essays in my A-level, and I wasn't given a choice of what to write about. We were given a title and a pretty strict structure to follow, and I had no agency in there. So of course, there was no passion, there was no investment in the work, and of course I did what I had to do to get the grade, but nothing more. I wasn't proud of it. Now I know it's how schools work, and they have to think about the exams, of course, but we should try and avoid that philosophy in our own personal writing. Because as soon as you lose that independence, you almost mentally just check yourself out, and you're not really proud of what you do anymore. It's also why many YouTubers and online writers actually end up hating their job, because they chase virality and they chase clicks at the cost of their own values. Now, of course, you can find balance in the two, but the general point still stands. A reliable writing habit should attract you to it. The idea of going to a cafe, getting a drink, and just sitting there for a few hours writing, that should excite you. Because as soon as it does, your habit is self-sustaining, it's rewarding, and it makes you want to do more of it forever. So if you want to write more, then you have to write what you love. If this next tip came to life as a person, I would kiss them, and I'd take them out on an expensive dinner. Because I love it, and I use it every single day. The best way to show you is through how I write the scripts for these videos. I have a table in Notion where I keep all of the videos I made, all of the planned ones, and their scripts too. So if I come up with a good idea, I'll add it to this list, and later on I'll come back to write it. Now that in itself is great. When I jot down interesting ideas, it means there's always something to write about. There's no such thing as a writer's block anymore, because I can come to this list and just pick something to elaborate on. But with literal seconds of extra effort, we can make this tip 10 times more useful. When I write down the idea of the video, I'll go into that document sometimes and actually write down some of the main points I should include. And these will probably end up as subheadings in the final project. For example, I have an idea for a video about how we can make our hobbies or interests a bit more meaningful to us. If I jump into this file, I can see here some of the main points that I thought I should mention. I added these ages ago and I forgot about them completely, but that's okay, because I can jump into this weeks, maybe months down the line, and I can see them and think, oh yeah, I get what he was trying to say here. And all I have to do now is fill in the blanks and expand upon each topic. And aside for giving me a prompt to continue the writing, I can see roughly the structure of the whole video. And that in itself makes the whole process so much easier. And all of that because of this tiny effort in the past. Your memory is unreliable. So the next time you have a good idea, keep it safe and store it somewhere. And of course, if you have a rough idea of what you want to talk about, which is usually the case, put that down too. You'll thank yourself down the line. This next approach is more ambitious than the rest. And if you can put it into motion, then you have my respect, because it's not easy. But if you do start it, then you probably have the best source of extrinsic motivation for your writing. Now, it's true that you should write what you love from within, of course, but that doesn't mean automatically all sources of external pressure are bad. They don't necessarily have to be toxic or overbearing, and they can actually be great ways to inspire you and to keep you going. And in this case, it's going to be some form of accountability. In its most basic form, it involves you writing in public. You take your work, you put it out in the world, and you let people give you feedback, you let them read it, and hopefully with enough patience and time, you have a community of people who actually like to read your stuff. Now that's amazing in itself. It's so rewarding. But with it comes this added boost of motivation. Now, at least in my experience with the channel and the newsletter, I am inspired not only to keep the quality of the writing as high as I can, but it also encourages me to keep up the flow. You could start posting casually just for fun. And who knows, at some point it could excite you and you want to do more of it. And before you know it, you could be the proud writer behind a successful blog or a newsletter. Now, of course, you'll run into new challenges, and nobody said it would be easy. But if you're more maybe business oriented, or you see writing as a potential career in the future, then this could be something worth investing in. It could get you seen in the professional world of writing, or it could become the face of your business that helps you make a living while doing something you love. I'm not a how to make 10K a month business bro. There's already a million out there, and I don't want to be part of that conversation. But it's still an option to consider. And just to be clear, I'm not saying that writing for yourself is somehow inferior. I did it for ages and I loved it. This is not better than the other approaches, it's just different. If you want some form of accountability, but the idea of writing in public freaks you out, then I get you. And there's still ways to seek accountability without it. I know that online writing clubs exist, both free and paid, I'm sure. And essentially you send in your work and people read it, they give you feedback, and you do the same for others. Now, I can see this as a way to have accountability with less pressure maybe, and it still gives you that motivation you need to write more. And of course, whenever you add that social element to a hobby, it tends to become more meaningful and more enjoyable. But let's say you do want to take the plunge and put your work out there for the world to see. You might wonder, where would I do such a thing? And luckily it's super easy. You can start almost immediately. There's no need to worry about making websites or fiddling around with the newsletter programs. There's none of that. The easiest place to begin is social media. If you love to write longer pieces of writing, like maybe essays or articles, then two good platforms to do that on are Substack and Medium. But perhaps even easier to get started on is places like X or LinkedIn, anywhere where text is the main form of media and where the algorithm can help you get seen. Writing in public was one of the best decisions I ever made, because not only was I practicing the skill, but I was getting more confident and I was building something valuable in the process. So if you have a similar aspiration, it could be the move. Now, since we're on the topic of writing in public, it only makes sense that I do a cheeky plug of the newsletter. Now on there, you can expect to find the usual insights on reading, learning, writing, and just living well in general. But there's also room for a different discussion, things you don't normally see on this channel. There's mini essays, there's book reviews, there's stories, and of course there's potential for so much more. So I'd love if you use the link to sign up down below. And of course it's totally free, so I'll see you there. Perfectionism sucks in writing. It's there on your shoulder mocking you as you write, and every sentence you produce, oh it's shit, you have to redo it, think about it again, what have you done, you're crazy. And if you're too scared to write something flawed, you might be sitting there at your computer for hours and hours with just a blank screen, and only a few sentences at the end to show for it. It's a gutting feeling. Not only does it make writing a painful slog, but it also prevents you from getting better. Because through writing and through practice, you make mistakes, and you do produce flawed pieces of writing, but that's exactly what allows you to learn and to grow from your mistakes. Writing is how you find your voice and your style, but that can never happen if you let perfectionism stall you 90% of the time. Now the solution isn't easy, because it asks that you have some level of trust in yourself, which is often hard to find. But once you do find it, it's easy for this technique to work its magic and help you beat perfectionism. The idea is to throw up your first draft. Literally to let the words pour out onto the page like a tsunami, and that means writing without thinking too hard. Don't worry too much about each sentence or the words you choose or the literary techniques that add some flair to the writing. The only thing you might want to consider is writing with some structure in mind, just so that there's a semi-logical flow in the writing. And this sounds totally backwards. Like, why would we stop caring about this stuff? It's what makes writing good. The words, the sentences, and the techniques. And that's true. And it gets even crazier once you think how people like, great writers like Ernest Hemingway and Stephen King recommend the same advice. But why? What gives? They don't overthink the first draft because it's much easier to refine your writing once you already have a skeleton to work with. To craft a perfect sentence right off the bat is near impossible because you don't know how it fits in with the rest of the text, which doesn't yet exist. However, once you have that first draft completed, you can tinker, you can edit, you can adjust things endlessly. And after a few rounds of editing, it comes together in this beautiful piece of writing, all because you didn't worry about it to begin with. And I know it's hard at first. I struggle with this even to this day, but over time you'll build trust in yourself to just get the words out and let it flow. And actually with time, you'll notice that your first drafts get better and better as you become a more experienced writer. With every script or newsletter that I write, I like to get it done quickly, and then in the next few days, I do some rounds of editing just to polish it up, make sure it sounds right, and make sure it's a final product that I'm proud of. Of course, this makes the end product better, and ironically, it's even closer to being perfect than the original perfectionist attitude would achieve anyway. But that can only happen if you trust yourself. So write freely, and then edit later on. This last point comes from one of my own discoveries, and looking back it makes me cringe so much. A while back I didn't like going on walks because I had convinced myself that it was more productive to just stay home and keep writing or working or whatever. Now that's wrong on so many levels, but I just want to focus on one. Because as I'm sitting there typing away, I'm getting the writing done, and that's good, but it doesn't last for long. Eventually you start to get tired and the fatigue kicks in, your attention span starts to worsen, and my solution was, what? To just push through it. Where's the sense in that? It would reach a point where I'm so mentally checked out that my writing, I'm barely getting any writing done. And it's just like pushing a boulder uphill. The solution was obvious. It was to just have a break. Nowadays I take more regular walks and I leave my phone at home. I don't play music, and that just gives me the space to think and to mentally refresh myself. And I'm sure you felt this, but once you return home, it feels like your mind has been cleansed. All of the brain fog just clears away and you can write with this fresh intensity. And it's not just a feeling either. There's scientific evidence to back this up. For example, this paper looked at how short walks affected the cognitive abilities of children. And to no surprise, it helped boost their attention, but also their brain's performance in general. I love this picture because you can see how vivid the difference is. And it's almost a perfect way to show off what our brain feels like after a walk. And you know what's funny is I actually remembered to add this point to the video script while I was on a walk. So if you give yourself that space to think, the ideas just come naturally. And that wraps it up. Those are all of the approaches I use to help me write 1,000 words almost every day. I'm sure there's a few more minor ones that I've forgotten to mention, but those are the main ones. And I hope at least one sticks with you and helps you achieve that same goal. And please, if you have your own clever techniques that you use to write more, I'd love to hear them, because I could use a few extra myself. It always helps. So of course the comments are open, my emails are open, so shoot me a message. I'd love to hear it. And as usual, thank you for watching.